right at the beginning of the Parsha, where it is, these are the offspring of Jacob. Joseph, who was 17 years old, tended the flock along with his brothers as a helper. And the word that's used there is na'ar, to the sons of his father's wives, Bilhah and Zilpah. Now, Chris, what do you know about Bilhah and Zilpah?
They were the concubines to Leah.
Right. And they're the concubines to both wives, but they're not the real wives. So the sons of those two have a lower status than the children of Leah. So, Joseph hangs out with those sons and not the other ones.
Oh.
Right? So that's a little bit interesting.
Question.
Yes.
You have in parentheses nar. In Yiddish, nar means kind of a stupid person.
Yeah,
right?
Well, that's the Yiddish use of it. In Hebrew, na'ar can mean two different things. It can either mean helper, as the typical translation has it, or can mean a youth, a kid.
Yeah.
Right? So now that's probably where the Yiddish term came from, because they had teenagers back then too. So, then a nar, it meant a young person, but it also meant somebody who didn't have that much common sense, right?
Yeah.
Because teenagers.
Yes.
Now, I don't know. I think teenagers had more sense back then because they had more responsibilities. But, I wasn't there. So.
Right. And they also had shorter lifespans. So a teenager.
You had to, get to work early.
Right.
And then the other thing about this verse, Joseph, it mentions Joseph, but it starts out by saying, these are the offspring of Jacob. And then it talks about Joseph, and it's like they forgot about all the other offspring of Jacob.
Yeah, but
he was
Joseph was the favorite son.
He was the favorite.
Well, yes. So maybe he comes first if he's the favorite. But it's like the text never, in sequence at least, mentions the others after Joseph. It says these are the offspring of Jacob, like it's going to start, like it's going to give the whole list. But no, there's no list. All right. So we have all these questions right at the beginning. And of course, we have other problems at the beginning. Just, how Joseph functions with his brothers, which is really interesting. And it's all fated, right? Everything happens because it needs to happen in order to produce the right result at the end.
But when you look at the second paragraph, because there's always that question, was Joseph gay?
And the answer is no. And I'll tell you why. Right? Okay. And now you could say, yes, he had marriage and children later on, but that doesn't necessarily prove anything as we know today.
Correct.
But you see in the story with Potiphar's wife that he's tempted.
Yes.
And that's what my mother would tell me. You go to those kind of women, you're a nourish cup. You know that?
Nourish, it's where the word nourishkeit comes from.
Right.
Okay.
But it's about curled his hair. I mean, he was very feminine.
So here's the thing. This is a very famous midrash. What is it? Why does it say he's a nar? Because it doesn't have to tell you that he's a young person. They just told you he's 17.
Mhm.
But when it talks about him being a nar, says the Midrash, it means he did narishkeit things, right? He groomed, he fancied himself up. And as Rashi says, the Midrash doesn't say it, but Rashi says, so, I'm going to look cute.
Well, if you look, there was, in fact, on the news the other night about a kid in one of the local school districts that was suing the school district because they suspended him for polishing his nails.
Yeah, I saw that.
Well,
that just, like we have not enough trouble in the schools right now. They have to kick somebody out or suspend him for, putting nail polish on, for goodness sakes.
when I was teaching school, the boys had to cut their hair. Now, when Dell was in school, he had long hair.
But I was close to being thrown out.
Right. But some of the boys in their teenage years do strange things. They wear earrings. They do
Yes,
all
indeed.
sorts of stuff.
Yes, indeed. There's, Dale, what year did you graduate high school?
71.
71. So you're 2 years younger than me. Well, but we belong to the same period.
Right.
So,
And Rabbi,
yeah, I think Barbara's absolutely right. That there was a lot of experimenting going on, whatever you could get away with.
The school I was going to would have thrown out the town banker for his hair too.
Yeah. And the same thing I think is true today. Girls and guys feel free to do a lot of experimenting. And some schools, I think, are, take the smart approach and they just pay as little attention to that as possible. And they get on with education. Okay. I don't know. We need more trouble in the school these days.
Yeah.
So anyway, so this is Joseph. Joseph is a kid who is clearly still in formation. Right? And of course, we know that from the way he approaches the subsequent discussion about his dreams. Hi, brothers. Let me tell you what I dreamed. I dreamed that I'm going to be the king and you're all going to bow down to me. Seichel,
Right. He lacked
or lack thereof. So, we know that Joseph is a nar, all right. He's immature. And he does immature things, maybe trying to make himself look attractive in order to look more mature.
So wait, Rabbi, going back to the dreams, are you saying they weren't prophetic?
Oh, I'm not saying that at all. I'm talking more about the way he describes his dreams to his family. It's not designed to endear them. You'd think he'd have enough seichel not to tell his brothers that he's one day going to be king over them. You have to have enough seichel to understand how something is going to come across, right? So this is the Midrash, and it's a very instructive little piece. Now, there's lots more about this, right? So here's the Baal HaTurim, right, who picks up on what I mentioned before. What happened to the other sons? How come they're not mentioned here? And he he takes off on Rashi and the Midrash. I left out the fact that Rashi also quotes that whole Midrash, right? But Rashi says this is really the underlying meaning. These are the things that happen in establishing the offspring of Jacob as a people. The fact that Joseph is such a nar, using the Yiddish, Jerry, as well as the Hebrew, the fact that he's such a nar is what causes everything else. And the point is not Joseph's age, because we already know that. And the Balaturim, who loves Gematria, he's the go-to commentator for Gematria. Must have been a math whiz. He said the Gematria of Nar is 320, which is the same as the Hebrew word shoteh, which means a fool. Right?
So that's the Yiddish.
Yeah, and Joseph is obviously not stupid, but he's a fool. He has no seichel. He has no common sense. Okay? Comments or questions up to here?
Sounds like he has book learning, but no street sense.
Yeah, if only they had books back then. But but yeah, I mean, that's what we would say about a lot of people. That's what you probably would have said about me when I was in school.
Perhaps the reason he was doing this, the makeup, what appears to be in makeup or curling your hair, if he's a small kid, he's impressionable. He's been around the women who make up their faces, and they become attractive to the men.
Yes. And here's another thing. Joseph is the son of his mother and bears a strong resemblance to her, which is part of the reason why, Jacob favors him. Right? Not just that he's the child of his favorite wife, but he's also the one who reminds him his favorite wife. Because he uses the same words in Hebrew to describe them both, except one is masculine and one is feminine. Yefei Toar v'Yefei Mareh. He's good looking and well built. I don't know how well built he could be at 17, but he's handsome. He's a cutie. And the other aspect of this is that Joseph, having lost his mother, in some ways may be trying to recover her by doing some of the things that he saw her do, right? She probably used whatever passed for makeup in those days, and he saw that as a child. And he remembered that. And now he does it too. Ronnie, I see you nodding your head. No?
Yeah, I don't agree with that assumption. I think he was drawn to his feminine side for whatever reason. I've heard he was a mama's boy.
Who lost his mama.
Right. But that doesn't mean that you take on a female persona.
No, he's not taking on a female persona. He's doing things that he saw her do.
But even at 17, I think you would know that wouldn't be acceptable in the male world.
It may have been at that time.
Pardon me?
It may have been, and if you look at the Egyptian culture, they did it. The men wore makeup.
That's
it was very
correct.
evident
that is precisely what I was going to ask, Barbara. How do we know that this behavior with the makeup and curly hair was viewed the same way we would see that? Maybe it was relatively normal. I don't see anything in the text that says it was wrong or whatever. It just describes what he did.
Well, if he was involved in seeing the caravans coming through or some of the stuff coming through, a lot of the cultures at that time did wear a form of makeup, not necessarily like a woman would make it, but men did wear makeup.
They painted their eyes, didn't they?
Yes.
Yes.
It strikes me that maybe instead of trying to look feminine, he was trying to look like he was acting like a wealthy person would do, someone who has the money and time for this kind of frivolity.
Like,
Or the high status that he dreams of later on.
Yeah, that makes
like
sense.
Jezebel.
I
He
like that.
painted her eyes because she needed to assert her authority in a time of danger.
Very good, Ann. Yeah. So maybe Joseph, who as a youth has limited credibility with his older brothers, he's trying to assert some authority. So for whatever reason, Joseph does all these things, at least that is the assumption of the Midrash. And, what exactly it means? Well, maybe a little bit of all of these things. I don't think he's taking on a feminine persona. I do think, he may be doing things that he saw his mother do. Maybe. All right. Other comments or questions before we go on?
He was certainly vain.
I'm sorry?
He was certainly vain.
Rabbi.
He's very vain. Yes. Yes,
So maybe
yes, Jerry.
So maybe since he was much younger than the other brothers, they picked on him a lot. And so he did things to irritate him.
Yeah.
Because they were all feminine, right? No, they were tough guys.
Yeah.
Correct? They were out there, doing all the manly things, and it probably just made fun of him. So he would dress funny just to irritate him.
Or he would, assert his difference.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's very interesting, and there's so much that is written about Joseph and his brothers. It's there's a lot that's been suggested, and more than we can really know. Yes, Ann.
When my mother died, I looked exactly like her. And my father gave me her earrings and asked me to wear them because he wanted to look at her and she wasn't there to look at.
Ooh,
Okay, that's a little creepy.
yeah, that's like very creepy.
No, I'm thinking that what you said about Jacob wanting to look at Joseph because it reminded him of his beloved.
Which frankly is also a little creepy.
Okay.
I mean, it may be that Jacob just didn't have a conscious awareness of what he was doing to Joseph. But, by picking him out as the favorite, by looking at him as the one who physically resembles, his departed wife, I would say it's on some level, I suppose it's natural, but you got to have some self-awareness. And I'm not sure Jacob did.
Why
So
are we picking out?
What, Ann?
Why do we pick out Jacob as the acme of the three patriarchs? The one is Hesed, the other is Gevurah, and he's Tiferet, which is the best. The best balance. He's not the
Yeah.
best balanced of them.
Yeah, in Kabbalah, Jacob's definitely the synthesis of the others, and therefore in some ways seen as more perfect. But that's not universally accepted in our tradition, that, you know, somehow Jacob is miles above his father or his grandfather. It's only in Kabbalah that that's true. And even in Kabbalah, you have to know, you know, Abraham is associated with a higher sphira, Jacob slightly lower, and Isaac slightly lower, and then Jacob associated with Tiferet. And so they're, you know, in that sense, Abraham and Isaac are higher. In other ways, Kabbalists look at Jacob as a better synthesis. Okay, other comments? Okay, so let's go to this next little piece. And this, I think, is the piece from Rabbi Brad Artson, right? Who says that, like many people today, Joseph thinks that he must invent a false and glamorous image in order to show his worth to himself and the world.
I don't see what I was looking at.
As if that weren't sufficiently pitiful, he also feels compelled to put others down in order to be noticed and appreciated. His desire to be better than everyone else expresses itself even in his dreams. Twice he dreams about his family bowing down before him. Twice he tells his family. Not bad, you know, not enough that he dreams about it. Yeah, and maybe the dreams are provided to him. They represent, you know, God's vision of the future. But he doesn't have to tell them. But he tells them how superior he is. So they wind up selling him into slavery, and he experiences despair. He learns how to sympathize. He learns that prisoners at the bottom are still human beings, that one can excel without having to minimize the talents or interests of other people. In prison, he accepts responsibility. Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh B'Zeh. In prison, Joseph shows an interest in the dreams of a deposed butler and baker, and in caring for such lowly people, he in fact plants the seeds of his own restoration and future glory. Joseph learns that his own talent can thrive best with other people's well-being. Far from being a threat, the happiness of acquaintances, friends, and relatives form a supportive environment in which each of us can blossom. Arrogance isolates, not skill. Ruthlessness, not drive, leads to loneliness. By living in a community, we can support each other to be the best that we can be. And in that way, we all serve to hasten the rule of God on earth. Okay, so that you know is an abridgment of his larger Devar Torah about this parsha, but I think there's a lot there to think about.
No, Rabbi, this is Daniel. I don't have my video on.
Yes, Daniel, I got you.
It's never struck me before until just now reading this bowing down part. The end of the story has the brothers bowing down to him.
That's correct. The dream
It's
is fulfilled.
It's not an inaccurate dream. It may be arrogant in the way he told everybody, but it's a prediction of the future.
Yes, it is.
Well, that sets the stage for everything he does, because he predicts the future here, that his brothers in the world is going to bow down to him. And then he makes the predictions about the baker and the butler, and that's what got him out of jail. Or the predictions of the baker and the butler.
Yeah. It's all you know.
It's all good.
It's all meant to end up good. Now, as Joe, to paraphrase what Joseph says, God took all the things that happened before and turned them for good. Okay. Obviously, selling your brother into slavery is not recommended behavior. It's sinful. What Joseph did was also sinful, if not, at least very immature. But God turned it all the way it needed to go.
Sometimes people who think they're the smartest one in the room are sort of pathetic because they aren't even close. And other times they really are the smartest person in the room.
Yeah, I mean, they may be smart in certain ways.
Superior.
Yeah.
I mean, I've met people that were brilliant and kind and generous, and he had a high emotional quotient. They're just really, really good people. Maybe Joseph was one. He took a little while to get there, but
That's the
maybe
thing.
he was.
I don't know. I think we all take a little while to get there. Most of us don't, pop up at 12 and behave like adults.
You understand, Rabbi? I'm just trying to come up with an alternate interpretation here that might not be one that I've had before.
Oh, that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I think
I'm sorry. Other comments or questions here? Well, let's go forward. Here's a very brief but very interesting midrash, okay? Which says, we should have expected the verse to begin with the oldest sons, right? Because when it says these are the offspring of Jacob, normally it would start with the oldest son. Reuben, Shimon, and so on. Doesn't even mention them. It's just Joseph. So it appears, and this is the piece of the midrash, Joseph resembled his father in all things, and all that happened to Jacob similarly happened to Joseph. All right? In other words, there was a certain degree of immaturity and misfortune in the life of Jacob, right? The immaturity about, buying your brother's birthright when he's hungry, or the misfortune of having to leave home so that said brother doesn't kill you, right? So, we think of ourselves, and sometimes in doing so, our children's history is tied up with ourselves in a way that's more than is healthy. Right? When you in a healthy family, you raise kids who feel free to be who they are. Yes, Dale.
The children leaving home in a not good way is typical of all the patriarchs. I mean, Abraham threw out Ishmael, and he sent all his sons after Isaac off to the east. Isaac, we know the story of Jacob and Esau, and then here we are, Joseph being sold off into slavery.
We are one dysfunctional family. And it's been clear to me for a long time that the patriarchs were not chosen because they were an ideal family. They were chosen because they were in some ways a typical family. Yes, with typical problems and maybe some very untypical problems. Yes, Daniel.
Speaking of patriarchs, I was just wondering, it's a little bit off of this quote, but we talked, the patriarchs are Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Why wouldn't Joseph be, he's the last of the of the major characters of Genesis, why wouldn't he be a patriarch too?
Uh-huh. Well, I have a theory about that, but let's hear what everybody else might have to say.
Well, Joseph got involved with the Egyptians, and he married an Egyptian, and he didn't have a lot of Jewish characteristics. So and it is up to his sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, to become one of the tribes and to become some of the leaders.
Yeah, that's an interesting theory. I like that. Yes, Anne.
Well, later on, the northern kingdom was destroyed and all the people were lost, the 10 lost tribes. And that was the Joseph tribes, Ephraim and Manasseh and
Yes.
almost
Yes.
all the others. So,
And frankly, because, as someone who accepts, the idea that there is human authorship in the Torah, not that it's not inspired, but that there is human input into it. I think that's the way the Torah is drafted. It is there to it reflects sometimes those later developments, including the destruction of the northern kingdom, and Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are the parents of the entire Jewish people. Joseph is not. And I think that's probably the real reason. But in order to accept that, you have to accept the idea that, the Torah is a relatively late document, and the authors knew of the destruction of the northern kingdom.
well,
Yes,
God would know anyway.
I'm sorry?
God would know. He knew the
Yeah,
kingdom would be
okay,
destroyed.
but God might not necessarily read you your history before it happens. That's called prophecy, and that was mainly left to the prophets.
Well, isn't it? But the Torah itself, in the format that we have it, was actually written down. It was always oral law, and always just stories. And then it was compiled by, I believe, the group, the Sanhedrin, or the group of 70. And it was originally done in the Greek. So that would kind of lend us to believe that there was some human input, and at least at one or more authors.
I think that's a fairly late suggestion for the authorship. I think it's clear that I would say most scholars today believe that at least most of the Torah was in hand well before a Greek version of it appeared.
Even before the exile in Babylonia.
Well, Deuteronomy is there.
There's a disagreement, but
Deuteronomy is there before the exile. Not clear about the rest.
Is it possible that
Daniel, you have your hand up?
I did at one point, but you went ahead and stated it. Basically, that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are the fathers of all of our people. And if we go one generation after Jacob, we leave out a whole bunch of tribes.
Right. But the author of the Torah knows what's going to happen to the 10 tribes.
Yeah, but still, the 10 tribes that get lost did have an effect on things before they got lost.
Yes, they did. Sometimes a good effect and sometimes not.
Yes.
Because those northern tribes, they're a bunch of rebels.
But now we're left with the children of Levi and the children, a composite of the children of everybody else.
Yes. Yes.
So we have to stop at Jacob for the patriarchs.
Yeah.
Or throw away a whole bunch of people.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, I'll share with you just one other theory about why Joseph is not considered one of the patriarchs. And that is, you know what Joseph does to Egypt, right? Basically, he makes the Egyptians slaves to Pharaoh. Pharaoh winds, thanks to Joseph's machinations, Pharaoh winds up owning all the land. And basically, everybody, is left with just enough to get by. And Joseph is responsible for some of this. It's true that Joseph needed to take hold of the resources in Egypt and dole them out appropriately. But he didn't have to claim their property for the crown, so to speak.
I didn't know that.
And that's and that some commentators consider a serious black mark against Joseph.
So, Rabbi,
Yes.
if the people living in Egypt at the time became, as you say, slaves, then later the Jewish people become slaves. You
Yes.
have two populations in that are slaves. Where are the people that are not slaves?
They're the landowners.
The dynasty that was with Joseph, that dynasty was overturned.
Yes.
So basically, it was a rebellion.
Yes.
I don't know
So-
that it was a rebellion as much as an invasion. They claim it was the Hyksos.
The Hyksos was the
They were
people in charge
invasions.
when Joseph came in.
I don't think so. I think they, at this point,
I'm confused. What period? I'm confused. So under
If you-
Joseph,
okay.
the Egyptians became slaves because Pharaoh took over their land and they worked for
Yes.
Pharaoh as
And
slaves.
so eventually people, may get their land back or they evolve in a different direction. But it's, the Israelites are made into real slaves.
Okay.
okay, if you
They
read in the
don't,
Torah, it
the
says there arose a
Egyptians in the
Pharaoh that
time,
knew not
in
Joseph.
the time of Joseph, the Egyptians basically, have to work the Pharaoh's land in order to survive. Technically, they're not slaves, but economically, they're
slaves.
pretty much at the whim of the Pharaoh.
They become sharecroppers.
They become sharecroppers. That's a good term.
A word that
We're talking about a long time afterwards. Who knows exactly how long, right? The Bible says, 210 years, but who knows? But at a certain point, the Israelites themselves are enslaved.
Well, that comes when after there was some kind of takeover of the Egyptian government, and in this
Yes.
case, it says there arose a Pharaoh who knew not Joseph.
Yes. And what does that mean? It means probably someone who didn't know the history, who wasn't attached to the history, and therefore felt free to take advantage of the Hebrews.
Okay.
Well, there's another version they talk about that it was the same Pharaoh, he just changed his mind. He
Yeah,
decided,
that's one of the commentaries also. I don't like it much, but it is one of the commentaries. I forget which.
Because you remember Joseph controlled all the grain and all that, right?
Yes, right.
So he was the one who was doling out whatever it was if you had money. So probably he told them, you as an Egyptian, if you don't have money, you got to go work to get this grain. Right? I'll give you a sack of grain, but you got to go work all week for it, right?
Yeah.
And that doesn't ever work right.
No, it does not.
If you look actually in the history book, not the Torah, but actually in the history book, they have there's his archaeological evidence of another peoples coming in from somewhere and overthrowing the Egyptian government as Joseph knew it or had the historical background. And it was at that point they became concerned about this big, large group of people in the Delta, which was the land of Goshen. And that's when the Israelites actually became enslaved, or
Yes.
a people became enslaved. And again, one can, if you relate archaeology and his civil history to the Torah, you can kind of see where the Torah story comes from.
You know, what's interesting, we were in Egypt actually this past summer. And oh God, it seems like 100 years ago. And there is no, in their history books, modern Egypt, there is absolutely nothing about Pharaoh, about the Jews, about slavery. That whole period of time has been eradicated from their history.
Right.
Nothing.
And if anything happened comparable to what the Bible says, you understand why the Egyptians didn't include that in their history book.
Correct.
It's a total triumph over Egypt.
Right.
So, you know, whoever's writing the history, he's an Egyptian.
But what they're hoping is with modern technology, they're hoping to find, as Barbara says, archaeological evidence that would prove the existence that the Hebrews were in Egypt and that the biblical story, I'm going to say is true, but that period of time actually existed.
Yes, yes. Now, I want to bring us back to the text of the Midrash, because there's an important point that we haven't really touched on here, right? And that is, you know, the verse itself and the fact that it only talks about Joseph, right? We understand how important Joseph is to the line of Jacob. We know his impact on the Jewish future, you know, because without Joseph, we might not exist, right? You know, we might have died in the famine, or we might have been absorbed into some other nation, such as Egypt, that would have taken us in during the famine, what have you, right? The point is that we never know exactly what the importance of one person will be, or what we might be singled out for, right? And so this may reflect the idea, and that's, I think, the intent of the Midrash here. It reflects the idea that Joseph is the one who made things happen. That it's through Joseph that not that there are Jewish children, but that there is a Jewish future. Yeah, Ann.
Nahum Footnick pointed out to me years ago that there's another incident in which one man does only one thing that is reported in the Torah.
And he's not even mentioned, his name isn't even mentioned.
You know the one I mean. When Joseph
know
goes
the one.
looking for his brothers, he
It's in
doesn't
this
find them, and he
Sedra,
would have
too.
gone back home, and he never would have got sold into Egypt. But instead, this man tells him where his brothers are, so he is able to find them. And this man's name is never given, and some commentators say this wasn't a man, it was an angel. But if it was a man, then this is what he was sent to this world to do. is to tell Joseph where his brothers were.
Yeah.
He made all
That's
the
in our
difference.
that's in our parsha also, because this is where the whole story starts with Joseph goes to kind of check up on his older brothers, right? Which they don't like very much, and they don't like him very much, and they take advantage of the opportunity to abuse him and to sell him into slavery.
And they wouldn't have been
And
able
who is that? Who is that masked man? Who is that man who points Joseph in the direction of his brothers?
So any one of us might do something that we don't even know matters. And it turns out that was our purpose on this world.
That's
We
right.
don't know.
That's right.
Very
And
good.
the biggest problem for me is I may already have done it. So, and then, it's like, so what's left for me to do? Right?
Rabbi,
Yes, Jerry.
doesn't Joseph say somewhere in the Parsha, I am here for a reason? All these things that happened to me are for
He
a
says,
reason.
and this is really later on, he
Yeah.
says, God put me here for a reason.
Correct.
And he tells his brothers this when they, when the reunion takes place and he reveals to them who he is, right? He says, don't feel guilty because God put me here for a reason.
Because otherwise he could have really taken advantage of him. I mean, if he was really had a grudge, correct?
Yeah.
So he recognized that I was put there for a reason.
Yeah.
That was probably to save the Jewish people from starving, right?
That's, presumably. That's a good reason.
But also to make sure they got up into Egypt so that they could go out and have a big
Yeah.
story to tell about the salvation from Egypt.
Yeah.
See, they say that you could come in, but you could never go out again. The Egyptians wouldn't let you leave.
Well, yeah.
That's another.
Yeah, but they also say you can't go home again.
Right.
Who said that?
Thomas Wolfe.
Yes. But you knew that, Ann.
Who said you could check in, but you can't check out?
The Eagles.
Very good, Rabbi.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, Hotel California.
Right.
I
You
knew
can
that.
check in anytime you want, but you can never leave. Thank you, Daniel.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Yeah, I'm your cultural hero for the day.
You're my cultural reference point.
I guess, or something. Other comments or observations about this? This has been a pretty good, wide-ranging discussion here. So,
I think
yeah,
I
Bonnie.
think one of the points in this whole story is you should not show favoritism within your children.
Yes, which
It
is
can lead to
exactly
very
what the next
dire
text
results.
says, right? You're reading ahead, Ronnie.
Oh, no, I didn't actually read it ahead.
Yeah,
I'm
well,
just
but here
thinking
you
that-
are. See,
Okay.
the Talmud says one should never show favoritism to one son above the other. Because of the additional expenditure of the weight of 2 coins worth of fine wool for the many-colored coat that Jacob made for Joseph, beyond what he spent for his other sons, his brothers envied him, and the end result was our ancestors went down to Egypt.
Mhm.
Right? And yeah, we can say, oh, well, it was all God's plan. Still wasn't a good idea on the part of Jacob.
Well, Jacob got his comeuppance for doing it too.
Yes, he did.
Because he got to live a few decades thinking his favorite son was dead.
Yes.
Yeah.
After having lost his favorite son's mother.
Yeah, his favorite wife.
Yeah. So, you know, anyway, yeah, it's a very powerful story with a very important lesson. Right? And it's interesting, just briefly, let me, because we're almost out of time, let me just show you this next text here from the Meshech Chochmah. It says, you know, the brothers saw that that Jacob loved Joseph even more than his brother Benjamin. You know? And so they said, well, this is more than just, you know, his mother was the favored wife. It was, you know, he's treating him special because he's the snitch. He's the one who tells tales on us. And that's why he's being, God, you know, Jacob is playing favorite with Joseph. And so that's why they really come to hate him
Yeah.
and want to get rid of him. All right. Thank you all very much. Happy Hanukkah. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
And
Happy Hanukkah.
Shabbos.
we'll be back on the last night of Hanukkah.
Chag
Thanks very
Sameach.
much, Rabbi.
Chag
Chag
Sameach.
Sameach.
Thank you. Very interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley.
Thank you,
Good
Ashley.
night.
Thank